let's talk about the time that this brave team of X-Men all sacrificed their lives in order to secure the future of their young nation. So we see Scott Summers on Krakoa saying his final goodbyes to Charles Xavier and Magneto as he is getting ready to head out with this team of X-Men he's gathered. Together, they all load up and head out to space near the surface of the sun with one objective on their mission: to destroy the Mother Mold Sentinel. But from their very arrival, the mission is going about as poorly as it possibly could. On Krakoa, we see Charles Xavier and the Stepford sisters forming a psychic circuit in order to communicate with Jean and the X-Men, and she quickly informs the professor that things are looking pretty grim, that Archangel and Husk are already dead. Nightcrawler's got some kind of internal injury going on. Hell, even Logan isn't himself. Scott assures the professor that they're going to finish the mission. They have to, or all of this was for nothing. Nightcrawler assures Cyclops that he's fine, that he's okay enough to get everybody inside, and then Scott begins to give everyone their orders. He tells Jean and Monet to stay behind on the ship so that the psychic connection to Krakoa would be withheld. The rest of the team would then be tasked each with releasing one of the control collars that hold the Mother Mold Sentinel in place so they can send the thing adrift and going to oblivion. Immediately, the plan begins to work as they all went their separate ways. We see Nightcrawler and Logan successfully disengaging their collars. He is relaying all of this back to Professor X and everyone on Krakoa, saying that they're halfway there, that the job's almost done. But unfortunately, before she can continue relaying information, we see that her and Monet's ship is being boarded. Monet forces Jean into an escape pod and says that she's going to stay behind. Somebody has to keep the connection with Krakoa, and if they don't find someone on the ship, they'll just keep looking until they find Jean. As she hits eject and sends Marvel Girl flying out into space, we see Monet making her last stand. Finally, we see Scott making his way to his control collar and successfully disengaging it. 3/4 of the way there's only one control collar left to go. Their fate lies in Mystique's hands. Unfortunately for her, Orcus had been trying to stop this the entire time, and Dr. Gregor had figured out a way to do so successfully. Mystique makes a desperate run to rush and try and disengage the control collar. We see the room that she's in sealed off, and an escape hatch opened up into space, sending her flying out into the void. They know that this won't stop the mutants for forever, that the X-Men will figure out a way around this, so we see Dr. Gregor going ahead and booting up the Mother Mold. Jean relays that information back to Charles. She tells him that it's being powered up, that there's only 30 seconds left, and wants to know what the hell they're going to do, but Professor X tells them, just do whatever it takes. Clearly, visibly distraught, we see Scott leaned up against the window as he hears Charles's orders. From across the station, Nightcrawler tells him that they can get there, and Wolverine says there's no other way, Slim. Hanging his head in shame, Scott gives the two the go-ahead. Now, Nightcrawler asks Wolverine if he's ready for this, but Logan has one question first. He asks his old friend, do you still believe that there's something waiting for us on the other side? Kurt asks, are you worried about your soul, Logan? But Wolverine tells him, I'm just wondering what a guy like me should expect. And comfortingly, putting his hand on his friend's shoulder, he tells him, when you awake from this earthly slumber, my friend, you look for me. I will be there waiting for you, radiant with open arms. Together, the two bamf out of the Orcus station, into the burning hot open space near the sun. Now immediately we see Nightcrawler disintegrated. But Logan is made of some sterner stuff. His healing factor allows him to hang on for just a couple of seconds, long enough for him to use his adamantium claws and cut loose the final collar, sending himself and the Mother Mold floating through space into the burning hot oblivion of the sun. Scott watches helplessly the final act of the bravest men that he knew as he relays the information back to Krakoa that the job is done. It cost them their friends, their family, it cost them everything, but the mission is complete, and as we see him trying to make a plan with Jean in order to get back to her escape pod, Scott is then shot in the back, and laying there with his mutant powers deactivated, we see Cyclops with his final thought, telling his wife that he's sorry, but he's not going to make it. Jean screaming in pain as she listens to her husband die, seconds before the drones catch up to her and kill her herself. Back on Krakoa, we see Charles thinking that this is how it ends, this is how it always ends, with fire, death, and the funerals of their children. Every victory, ashes, for every triumph, a defeat. They have murdered so many of us that the world has just grown callous and used to it. Just how things are for the people, for the mutants, but as a single tear rolls down the professor's cheek, he thinks to himself one thought: no more. We see Lorna Dane asking her father about humans if there's any good to come from them at all, and Magneto says that there is one thing. He says that mankind taught them that they didn't really take off as a species until they formed an agrarian culture. They stopped moving around, they planted themselves, they said this is a good place, it is fertile, and it's ours. The one good thing humans taught them was society. See, Magneto and Professor X always wondered what would happen if mutants stopped being hunted. They didn't have to run and hide, if their greatest traits didn't have to be strength and aggressiveness, but rather intelligence, ingenuity, creativity, and thanks to the Five, they now know. It all begins with Fabio Medina. See, for years people made fun of him because of his mutant power of producing a limitless amount of gold balls. But they had recently discovered that these, in fact, were eggs. They then get the help of Proteus, who, with a little warping of reality, makes those eggs viable. The eggs then get an injection of preserved mutant DNA, courtesy of Mr. Sinister, who, yes, has a genetic database of every mutant to exist. And with the help of Elixir, life can actually begin. He kickstarts the process of cellular replication. After that, all the embryo needs to mature is time. Time, which thankfully can be controlled by Eva Bell. Now, creating life is delicate. Hell, it's almost impossible, and individually, none of these mutants would be able to do this on their own. But then, there's Hope. Like, literally, Hope Summers. Her powers allow their powers to operate not only at peak potential, but all in unison. Separate, individually, they're all great mutants, but they're not transcendent. Together, however, they have made this mutant nation whole. As we see these eggs cracking open, Charles Xavier watches on gleefully as he gives them the command, "To me, my X-Men." Lorna points out, though, that these are just bodies, yeah, temporarily evolved, but it's not really them, right? It's just a shell. And that is where Professor X comes in. See, Cerebro, yes, his primary function for years was to be able to locate mutants all around the world. But as of late, that has very much become its secondary function. Now, its primary function is to copy the very mind of all of the mutants, their entirety, their essence, every memory that they've ever had. So now, Charles Xavier can put the very soul back into a mutant shell. Xavier admits to Scott while he's laying there on the ground that even knowing he could bring him back, a part of him dies whenever one of his X-Men do. But Scott doesn't want to hear it. He just wants to know if the mission worked. And Professor X tells him that it did, that their sacrifice wasn't in vain, that their gift saved them all. And Storm makes an announcement addressing her brothers and sisters of Krakoa. She tells them all a great thing has happened today, a miracle made possible by mutant hands. The Five have now righted the wrongs of man and defeated mutant kind's greatest enemy, death. By the power that is their birthright, the Five had returned the mutants they thought lost to them, lost to their families, lost to their homes. And watching on, Charles Xavier and Magneto finally are standing side by side, knowing that this is the good work. Today, they are filled with hope, and today, the X-Men are celebrated as not only mutants, but heroes of Krakoa.